Time to abandon ship.
Oh no!
Here we go!
Can I persuade you to join us for a drink? It's a tradition.
Here.
Jar Jar, homie, my main man, quickly. Before the Separatists attack, get into the escape pod.
Hey! This is escape, then we're the pod. Jesus!
Welcome to Star Wars Escape Pod. I'm your host, Josh, and if you've never tuned into the show before, welcome to Star Wars Escape Pod. Star Wars Escape Pod is all about bringing you Star Wars discussion and chat by Star Wars fans to Star Wars fans, completely ad-free, completely reliant on you guys for sharing the show and leaving us those awesome reviews. We're going to get into the Bad Batch Episode 8 reunion, the episode where Crosshair meets up and confronts the Bad Batch finally on Bracca. And there's no better person to chat about it other than our co-host Blake, who we're meeting in the Cantina right now. Let's do it.
Another happy landing.
All right, welcome back, Mr. Blake.
Hey. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Always good to have you back. I was wrong about last week. I thought that we'd seen all the footage from the trailer.
Oh.
And I guess this was the last episode that we saw some clips that I guess were also in the trailer. But
You're going to have to go back and count all the clips, because now I'm wondering if there's going to be another 5 episodes.
yeah.
There's one shot each.
Right. Well, it was a great episode, honestly. I mean, you said something right before I hit go here, and in the sense that we don't have a lot of notes for this one because there was a lot of action.
It was a lot of action this episode, yep.
That being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I actually really enjoyed this episode a lot.
Yep, agreed. I've been looking forward to finally seeing Crosshair after them again and finally getting into more Imperial stuff. I felt like I was kind of itching for it at this point. It was a long time coming and too long of a gap in my mind, but I get that there was certain story points they needed to touch on first.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice that they finally brought him back into the picture, and it followed up from the cliffhanger last time where the Scrapper Guild had, I guess, noticed them, the Bad Batch and Rex on the edge of the Venator class ship, and Rex left and stuff like that, and they sent info that the Bad Batch was actually on Bracca, and that's where it just like left off kind of thing. And I love how this episode just picks up that story, because it kind of felt like an arc finally, whereas like the last ones have been a little bit disjointed as far as connecting to the next episode. And that's something I really loved about the later seasons of Clone Wars, is that there was arcs, right? You just watch like 2 or 3 in a row and you got like a movie worth of story, No,
I agree. And they kind of picked up on that from like season 3 onward.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we're going to start to go that way now, because when they first started the series, it felt like it was going to be one storyline,
Yeah.
And then we started getting these episode to episode arcs.
Right.
Which did make it feel pretty disjointed. I mean, it's cool because you explore parts of the galaxy, but you're also like, we left on this cliffhanger at the beginning of like the opening movie, like intro episode, and we're just left with sitting here wondering and waiting for like 5 episodes.
Okay, here's one thing that I want to pitch just before we kind of get into this episode too much further, because we're 8 episodes into this first season and everything, and it is called The Bad Batch. Naturally, it's going to be a show about the Bad Batch. When the Clone Wars first came out, it was very much focusing in on, at least with the theatrical release, we thought, oh, we're going to get a lot of Anakin, Ahsoka, a lot of that, right? And there was a lot of that in season 1. But what was really cool about the Clone Wars is that we had episodes that focused in on completely different characters at times, right? Like there was complete arcs where we'd get into bounty hunters and and complete arcs about some of the villains, right? Like,
I think I know where you're going with this.
So I mean, just before we kind of reach the end of this review, I just want to pitch that out and say I would be more than okay if they took that route with this show as well. Even though it's called The Bad Batch, that's something that really made Clone Wars really special, and I'd be fine seeing other characters show up in this time period in this show, despite the title, just for the heck of seeing what they're up to.
I agree. And I think what you're getting at is this could be a good opportunity to finish the arcs left open by Clone Wars.
Right. Yeah, exactly. At least the ones that can be shifted over into this post and
there's one thing
Revenge of the Sith.
Directly related to that I wanted to get into, but we should probably save it to the end. Right.
Well, we'll do that. All right. So very quickly, if I didn't do it in the intro, very quickly, to anyone who's wondering what episode this is the one where Crosshair finally takes his Imperial forces and goes to confront Clone Force 99 on Braca. But yeah, let's start off with that, because it very quickly gets into that aspect of the episode. I'm gonna very breezily skip over the whole fun moment with Omega disarming a smoke bomb.
Yeah,
it was a good laugh.
Yeah, agreed. I mean,
a lot of that stuff in the first couple minutes was like, all right, cool. But the substance is after.
We would all expect him to have used an actual explosive, so it was actually a pretty good.
It was a good joke. Yeah, it was a good twist. I actually liked it a lot. I was like, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Surprised me as a viewer. It just surprised me. I was
me
like,
too.
Okay, yeah, I like that. But it's the substance comes in when we finally go back to Camino, and something that really spoke to me as far as a piquing of interest kind of thing in this Camino plot, because behind the scenes, of course, we have Omega's real purpose, the subplot that's really kind of been stitched through all the episodes so far.
Hinted at, yeah.
They called it something very specific. They used the terms contingency plan when they were referring to Omega. It was Lama Su, I believe, who said it, and he said something along the lines of like, we need our contingency plan to work out or something. I don't know. He said something like that, and he was referencing Omega, and I just thought like, that's very interesting, because we've speculated that she's a new breed of clone that was maybe purposely intended to be a new alpha clone.
Yeah.
That might have been for a whole new lineup of subjects behind her, right? And it's possible
hard for me to figure how that would work, though. Like,
yeah.
I don't think switching a chromosome suddenly makes a clone DNA usable for other clones, because
right.
I'd have to look into the canon to see if it's still a thing, but at least in the EU, you can't clone DNA. You have to have the original genome.
Yeah, I don't know how it works either. My original theory was, because I don't even know how like actual cloning is. But I mean, we're talking about a fictional story here, but I just assumed that they were trying to make a new type of donor that was that resembled the structure of Jango's genetic code, because a lot of that template work was there for the Kaminoans, but then they were able to work off of that in a way that would be able to produce more clones off of her, and it wouldn't be a deteriorating DNA because Jango's dead, right? And they would have a new template clone to kind of use as a living substance, right?
But that still raises the question, why did you have to switch the gender instead of just using any other clone's DNA?
I don't know. I mean, I think maybe that's just the process of, maybe they just had to mirror Jango's DNA to restructure it to make it like more...
I think there's got to be more to it than that. I feel like...
There does. Like, maybe it's just all theories right now, but yeah.
Maybe part of it was they don't want everyone else to know. Because if they cloned a new clone, a new template clone that looked like every other Jango clone, then people will probably catch on. But if this is like a different person, because now it's like it's this girl, no one's going to say, oh, that's a Jango clone, right?
Right.
Like it was kind of like revealed over time
Yeah.
when she basically admitted it, but the regular clones had no idea. And that's
Right.
also proven in, or like Crosshair. I don't think he knows.
I just thought of
The
something.
Empire doesn't.
Okay, here's the other thing. They could be making a offshoot of Boba's DNA, which Boba's a clone, but he's a direct replica,
Copy, yeah.
a direct copy with no modifications, which basically makes him another alpha clone, template clone, theoretically, if they were to use him. Now, they don't have him as access, but he lived there as a kid for years, right? So there's no telling whether or not they could have taken a sample of his blood, at least, right? And I don't know, maybe it'll come up that that's something that they did and just kept it as a backup or something, and maybe somehow Boba and Omega are connected, all right? Now, the theory kind of pipes into this end moment here and this story arc that we're going to chat about at the very end, which I've got my theories as to, like, possibly him returning into the show.
Yeah, I think so too.
And stuff, right? There could be some sort of connection there. I know other people online have also speculated that Omega has something to do with Boba as well, and I just don't know what it is yet, but this is just something that's been brewing in my head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if there were to be any kind of anything, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if she was just a restructured genetic version of Boba Fett as to a, yeah. Who
Well,
knows?
let's just hope that the same thing doesn't happen to them as what happened to Luke and Leia.
Yeah.
They don't have an awkward kiss on Hoth.
Right. I think Omega's a couple years younger than Boba at this point, but yeah, let's.
That's true. Yeah, I guess.
hopefully.
Well, not a whole lot older. Maybe like I guess 3 or 4 years max.
Yeah. Well, okay. Here's the other thing: we don't know if Omega has growth acceleration or not.
That's what I was actually just thinking about.
And yeah, and Boba doesn't, and he's a couple years older than Omega. He's maybe, I mean, Clone Wars is 3 years worth of time, and by Attack of the Clones, I think he must have been like 12 or something like that.
He's quite young. Yeah.
So he's like 15 by the end of the war, kind of thing. And Omega clearly seems to me as if she's about 12 years old. But you know, there's no telling. She's a very isolated girl, so it's possible that she's older and just seems younger.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
she's just never seen outside of a rainy laboratory.
And then you get that weird situation where if she is growth accelerated, then she's the body of a 12-year-old and the mind of a 6-year-old. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some question there as to, like, if she isn't growth accelerated, I'm just curious, what was the Kaminoan's intention of making Omega in the first place?
And
like,
where was she this whole time?
Right. And this kind of pipes into them calling this a contingency plan, right? Lama Su's contingency plan. Did they plan for this to happen when they made a deal with Sifo Dyas and Tyrannus and effectively Palpatine, right? Did they suspect something was up and think to themselves, we need to do something to protect our wallets or something like that? Anything, right?
Yeah.
We need to do something.
We know that they knew about Sidious.
Yeah.
So they definitely knew something dodgy was going on, and they seem like the kind of society that would plan ahead.
Yeah, they're smart.
An inevitable betrayal. They're not just like super trusting, right?
Right, yeah. Because even with or without growth acceleration, she's over 3 years old.
Yeah.
So she has lived during the Clone Wars, but never actually saw anything happen because she was just on Kamino the whole time.
But then, how long ago was the attack on Kamino, which happened twice?
It happened, at the Rishi Moon outpost in season 1, and then later they attacked the planet. But in chronological order, it's a little closer together in the first third of the show, I think.
So, because she knows nothing about the war, either she was sleeping through the whole thing, or she wasn't on Kamino yet. It didn't exist.
Yeah, it's a tough one to place because, you know, you're very right in the sense, like, there was stuff that happened on Kamino in the war, and, you know, she knows nothing about the Clone Wars, unless she was really just referring to she's witnessed an attack on her planet and that was it. It's also possible that her being so important to Lama Su and the rest of the Kaminoans, it's possible that as soon as that place was hit with an attack, they pretty much just threw her in a bomb shelter and she didn't see anything, or like didn't really know what was going on or whatever. It's very, I don't know. There's a lot more to this whole Omega storyline than has come out so far in the show. We'll get to it later.
Yep, it's going to be revealed. And, well, unless they're planning season 2 and they're going to drag it out.
Right, yeah.
Which is totally possible.
It's a possibility, for sure. So amongst this episode, I mean, because I know there's a lot of action and stuff like that, and before we get into like the real kind of root of this finale plot, was there anything that kind of stuck out to you through the duration of the main chase between Crosshair and the Bad Batch in that Venator class ship?
Yeah, 2 things specifically. One was like a cool nod to the rebellion, I think, which was Echo and Hunter were talking, and they're like referring to Rex, right? Where they're now on this job where they basically became mercenaries, and Rex didn't join them. They didn't join Rex. But Echo says, "We're soldiers. What other path is there?" And he's referring to how Rex said, "There's something else for me," and he kind of went off, right? But didn't really allude to it. And like, obviously the first speculation is like early days rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Because what other job is there for ex-soldiers? Either you move on to the next war or you become a mercenary.
Yeah, I like how he brought that up too. It was very subtle. It was a very small line, but I thought that was quite effective in him bringing it up, because Echo has, I mean, we had an extensive chat about Echo on our What Happened subseries, but he's seen it all. I mean, he's lived through it all, and it's just an endless loop. It was like, he's been born, all these clones, they've been born soldiers. That's the only life they've known. That's the only life they're ever going to have, it seems. And, Cut Lawquane is kind of a, I don't know, this odd sort of a guy who it worked out that he isn't a soldier anymore.
One
right?
of a million circumstance for sure.
Right.
Maybe more if you consider how many clones there are.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I think the important thing for I guess as a viewer, like me personally, I think, Cut, even though he's not a soldier anymore and stuff like that, this is still a really dangerous time, and he still is a clone, could be still caught by the Empire, and effectively the entire purpose of his life right now is to just protect his family. So in a way, that's kind of what Echo and the rest are doing already. Like, they're being soldiers for each other. Like, they're protecting each other and trying to survive as a group.
No, it's true.
They're doing that all based on what they know as a soldier. So really nothing's changed. They're just trying to outrun another enemy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what Echo was talking about. Yeah.
And yeah, to go with that, like, Cut Lawquane is a great example where he's tried very hard to not have to live that life, but it always comes back and finds him, right? Yeah,
exactly. He's just, they're all cursed with the the Django face on them, and it's a life that they're not going to be able to outrun. And for a lot of them, for many of them, aside from Boba and perhaps some odd exceptions in which there was no growth acceleration used, it's a life that they're not going to live very long either. I mean, it's true. Half his life as a normal guy, right?
And the other thing to keep in mind is they were raised as soldiers from birth. So it's like, once they're no longer soldiers, they have no idea of what that's like. Whereas like modern humanity, like, you grew up, family or whatever circumstances, and then if you join the military, you still have all that prior knowledge of life outside the military. They don't have that.
Right. Yeah. So what was the second thing you wanted to bring up there?
The second thing was actually more of a question for you. So at the end of the chase, when the Bad Batch is trying to escape and they're going through the ion engine,
I thought that was a really cool scene. By the way.
Agreed. I thought that's the first time we've ever seen the inside of an ion engine.
Yeah.
Like at a distance.
Yeah.
So, and just the whole play of either getting sniped or them getting burned to a crisp, I thought was pretty cool.
I thought that was awesome, and I love the effects were super well done in this scene as well. Like, they nailed it.
I thought it was awesome too. And the classic D&D tale where you're on the job to try to make some money, and just to live, you have to use all the things you went to get to make money from. So then in the end, you still end up broke.
Yeah,
Broke
exactly.
but alive.
Yeah, it's stuck between a rock and a hard place in a lot of these, it's like you go left or you go right? And it's like you say, very classic D&D move for a story like this with a group. Yeah,
exactly. So my question to you though is, after they managed to separate the tube, and they fell to safety, the engine came on and it like fried and burned Crosshair's face and a big chunk of his body. Do you think that's going to leave him with a bunch of like battle scars, so he's going to look different from now on?
Yeah, I think they're effectively turning him into a villain. Right. And there maybe he's going to look the part. I could be totally wrong in that. And perhaps they're going to stick him in some back end. It's all going to be good. Right.
Right.
But I could see them going that route. Like, it's
not always for sure. I mean, look what happened to Kylo Ren.
Right. Or exactly.
Even Darth Vader. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Darth Vader retained his ugly face to the end. But,
and they threw him in Bacta as well, like a full tank.
Yeah. Yeah. So who knows? He might, maybe he'll come back from it, maybe not. But yeah, that is kind of an interesting thing to speculate on. I mean, I would not be surprised though if they decided to make him a bigger villain going forward and really kind of adopt that on his face, so he's like a little scarier to look at, and he's always got his helmet off, chewing on his stick and all that stuff. So it's like, his little toothpick. So, I mean, I would not be surprised if they wanted to make him a Scarface of some kind and, even more menacing to look at.
They're going to make him into Two-Face, or he's half villain, half hero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Two-Face Crosshair. But
that's right. Well, that's pretty interesting, though, because, like, I was not expecting that to happen. And usually it's like classic animation, you're hurt one moment and then the next scene you're totally fine. There's like some soot.
Yeah, exactly.
Just wipe it off.
I've got a question for you actually. Have you gotten used to seeing clones and accepting them as the Empire yet?
It's still weird. Like every time I see it, it feels like a little bit like a betrayal, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, it is, but
yeah, I mean, because I felt that way in this episode when we saw the guy who was at the bridge and he was turning on the engine.
Yeah.
Because like it's that classic clone animation of them doing stuff. And they seem so much more competent than the stormtroopers. And you're so used to that exact scene, like saving the heroes.
Yeah.
But in this case, they're trying to kill the heroes.
Right.
And it's weird. And if I'm honest, it makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean it's on it, and I actually quite like this show for that, because it just gives so much more depth to those characters. Going back and watching Clone Wars, it gives so much more depth to those background troopers that we see in Revenge of the Sith, and effectively makes this whole Order 66 thing almost just as sad and heartbreaking as the Purge, right? Because when Anakin turns to the dark side and kills off all the Jedi and everything, that's like one thing that Clone Wars really did well, was we got to know these characters and now we're seeing them all drop like flies. And then, with the clones though, I never really used to think like, oh, they don't have a choice anymore. Like they're just boom, like mindless drones that kind of follow these ridiculous orders, right? And in that moment when Anakin is kind of going off and doing his thing and killing off all, his Jedi and stuff like that, Palpatine does the exact same thing on his end, and he's basically killing off any chance of a viable life, using their own brain to make proper conscious decisions going forward after that moment, right? He with 2 words makes them all these villains, right? Which they may as well just be dead, because there's no one after that moment can possibly take out all these chips out of every single one, and most people don't even know they exist. So
I'm really curious to see how a clone conversation goes now with the chips activated, because prior they were kind of rowdy, like there was like a school lunchroom, right?
Yeah.
But now with this like brain chip, it almost feels like they become mindless drones.
Yeah, they feel a little, just a little more. They're to the point. There's no.
Almost robotic.
Yeah, there's no deviation. There's almost like there's no natural human side to them.
Yeah, there's no
anymore.
Personality like they used to have.
Yeah, and it's funny that this actually came up in Clone Wars as well. It got brought up by one of the cloners to I forget who it was. It must have been Tarkin or somebody else. But they said something along the lines of how it was actually the Jedi who've inspired creativity and uniqueness in these clones as the war's gone on, and has kind of effectively changed each of their attitudes in some way whatsoever, right? Yeah. So they're all very different people, by the time you kind of get to know them across the course of the show. And in a large part of that, it's due to, well, firstly, they're all very different people. Even though they're clones, they're different people, right? But then secondly, I think there's a lot of influence put on them by people who have not been bred in a laboratory, right?
Yeah. And each other in circumstances.
Yeah. And that's kind of deviated them from the idea of having this army that is to the letter, they will follow orders, and that is it, right? And that's kind of the intention of this chip, is that they actually follow these orders. And in Clone Wars, it came up multiple times that, being a good soldier means doing what you think is right. And that's that message kind of came up like a lot throughout multiple arcs. And, I guess it's all comes down to the fact of like, if you have a leader who you don't believe like they're given the right orders or whatever, right? That you just personally just do what you feel is right. If you feel like you can't trust that person in charge. Right. And so, it's like we saw that with the Pong Krell arc on Umbara, and
I think that arc specifically really influenced a lot of clones that they can't just trust whoever's in charge.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then in some scenarios we had a clone completely betray the Republic, and that one was in one of the first, I think it was at the second or third episode ever. If you're watching them chronologically, it's in the episode called The Hidden Enemy. I believe it's a season 1 episode, and it takes place right before the Clone Wars theatrical release. And there was a clone named Slick that betrays the 501st or whatever, and he's giving information to the Separatist Alliance in exchange for money. And this is a clone that we're talking about, like a sergeant or something like that. He's one of the minor kind of leaders or whatever. But I mean, he was doing it for very selfish reasons. But it's
even more obscure because clones have no understanding of money.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what they're taught in their clone school, but
they're given everything by the military, and they live off
exactly
food and shelter, everything provided to them. So that's extra obscure.
It's extra obscure, but I think at that point they had already lived through, I mean, Geonosis has already happened, this and that. I mean, this guy has spent some time as a trooper long enough, I guess, that he realizes aside from war, there's other stuff out there. And I guess he just realized, I just want that stuff. So he just packed up and left and betrayed the Republic and everything. But that was a clone that his chip hasn't activated yet, but they were still bred to follow orders and be like hardcore drilled and trained to kind of follow the orders of whoever's in charge. And there were still some incidents in where they were able to just do whatever they wanted, right? And so this chip, though, now that it's activated, it is weird that seeing these clones, they just seem a lot more kind of subdued, almost as if they aren't going to do what they want. Like they're just gonna
blindly follow orders.
Yeah, like or just be kind of these these kind of mindless drones. Puppets. These puppets, just kind of floating, right? And Crosshair just kind of like, even though he knows about this chip, he just, because it's already activated, he mind you, his has been dialed up at this point, but that too. But he doesn't seem to have any remorse for killing off his old friends, right?
Which is crazy. You think that would be the most extreme thing that he could do? They're his family, really. He has no one else.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of this brain chip enhancer, though, it got me thinking, what if it could be reversed?
I think it could be reversed. I mean, like any piece of technology, I think there's a way to go backwards. It's crazy technology. I mean, it's part of their brain. It's like this little tumor fleshy thing that's like stuck in there. But I think it's possible that it could be reversed if they had the technology to do it.
I'm thinking just in the room where they control the chip enhancer. There's just a lever, and you just switch it from more to less.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll ever go that route. I don't know.
It's possible. I mean, there's still enough riding on they can save him from the chip that I think something's going to happen.
Right.
It's funny that they themselves haven't talked about it as a plan yet, though. You know what I mean? Maybe
yeah.
I feel like it's a story point that they're trying to hide, but it's really obvious.
Yeah, and that kind of totally. And this goes now without saying that it was either last week's or this week's episode. Now we've seen all the footage from the trailer. So going forward, we don't know what's ahead, right? And there's like another 8 episodes or so, or 6. It's like between 6 and 8 more to go through. So it's gonna be a very mysterious ride ahead. You know, like there's nothing that can give us any clues aside from our own speculation. And the next episode drops in 2 days, so it'll be interesting to see kind of what comes up, whether they go back to Sid, whether they go off and do their own thing, and
or they follow this new character, which I think we should finally get into.
Right. Okay, so let's get to the final scene where Cad Bane finally shows up. Pretty crazy moment.
Cad Bane. We have not seen him in 5 years now.
So the last time that he showed up was, I mean, at least in a finished episode of the Clone Wars, was when he tried to kidnap the Chancellor Palpatine on Naboo. That was the last time, I believe, that
what season's that?
That was season 4.
Okay, so it was a long time ago. We went a whole season and then an additional half season.
It's been a while. And and since then, it's important to remember there have been some canceled Clone Wars arcs. There is a dedicated 3-part episode of the podcast on the Clone Wars Talk sub-series that I was doing with Diego last year. And I think it's I tweeted this out on the Twitter. It was like Clone Wars Talk parts 35 through 37 or something like that. It was like 3 episodes dedicated to all the unproduced episodes of Clone Wars. So we did one about Dark Disciple, which was the novel that adapts the 8 episode arc about Ventress's storyline being finished. There was one about Son of Dathomir, which is the 4 episode arc that takes place with Darth Maul between seasons 6 and 7. And there was one dedicated to all the proxy animation episodes that we never got finished, which proxy animation, for anyone who doesn't know, is how they sketch up an episode before they actually animate it for real. And they use very rough models and geometry to kind of place where things go and animate characters, and they do all the recordings for all the lines and dialogue, and they're able to figure out their edit and everything like that. So you kind of get the idea. It's like basically a moving, how would you put it? Like a moving storyboard.
Basically. Yeah. That's how I'd explain it.
Yeah, so a moving storyboard in 3D space.
Yeah, so it's like setting up your camera angles and stuff.
Yeah, and you can see like notes like floating around and whatever, like missing textures on certain things. It's quite funny to see, but it's basically like watching a very incomplete, crappy version of a Clone Wars episode, right?
It's like a high school kid's attempt at making a movie.
Yeah, exactly. Or watching a video game movie that took place in like 1991 or something. Like, I don't know. So some of these proxy animation episodes, we've had clips of some of these episodes that didn't get produced because Disney canceled Clone Wars. Yes, we do have a season 7.
Are they canon?
The proxy. So for anyone who doesn't know, Disney had canceled Clone Wars. We missed out on basically a season and a half worth of episodes because there was supposed to be 8 full Clone Wars seasons. We now have basically what is 6.5. The half that I'm talking about is season 7 on Disney Plus. But the finale arc was actually the finale of season 8. So there's a lot of reshuffling that happened. I think what happened was they gave Dave a budget and said, pick your poison. He chose the ones he wanted to tell. And that was that. And he got some conclusion, at least, to that project. But we saw a lot of stuff kind of go out the window. But when Clone Wars was canceled, there was this Clone Wars Legacy project, which Son of Dathomir, Dark Disciple, that kind of stuff was labeled under that sub banner as to try and keep Clone Wars alive in one way or another. There was an interview that came out around that time with Dave and Pablo, and they were talking about these different stories that were going to come out. The Proxy animation arc about the Crystal Crisis on Utapau, the Dark Disciple novel, and then the Son of Dathomir comic by Dark Horse. Those 3 things they were talking about on this video on YouTube. You can still look it up. It's called Clone Wars Legacy Show Reel or something like that. And Pablo said, going forward, even though the public hasn't seen some of this content, we still look at those stories as having had happened. And so that's why in that Ahsoka novel that we've had a discussion about in the past, where it flashes back to that fight scene between Ahsoka and Maul, the dialogue is different because it's based on this old script on an old Proxy animation episode that no one's ever seen, but the script was done at the time and now redone for season 7 years later.
That's really interesting to think about, though, because if Pablo says we consider those things as canon, that means at some point, in some way, it will be released to the fans.
Yeah, and it's been
canon.
Yeah, and it has been pointed to a lot in Star Wars Rebels. We got a lot of those stories wrapping up or translated, but I think there were some things that they had referenced in some of those episodes that we never got. The Bad Batch arc that we finally got finished, because that was one of the Proxy arcs that wasn't finished and then got finished for season 7. The planet that they're on is fine. Like they defused the bomb and it's all good on the Amaxine station or whatever it's called. Or sorry, no, I'm thinking of High Republic. Whatever that planet that was on, that they had to disarm the big bomb that was on. Yeah. In Rebels, that planet's blown up. So that bomb at some point went off. And I think it must have been in one of those unfinished episodes in Clone Wars, right? So there's still a lot of stuff that we haven't seen there. There's like 20 something episodes that we haven't got. Yeah. And so sorry, I'm kind of like the long story for anyone who just didn't know about any of this stuff. There was an arc, about Boba Fett and Cad Bane. Yeah. And it was a 3 to 4 episode story arc that would have taken place with those 2 characters. In short, Boba would have basically been mentored by Cad Bane to some level because Cad Bane had been mentored by Jango in the past. And when Jango died, Cad Bane became the galaxy's best bounty hunter. So he kind of takes it upon himself to train up Boba. And this also points towards why Boba is so Western in the original trilogy and forward. Like, he has the spurs, he's got the Western flair. His dad didn't really have that. He had the gunslinging thing going on, but that was pretty much it, right? Like, he didn't have the spurs.
That, he was just a carbon copy Mandalorian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that connection between Cad Bane being the cowboy Western bounty hunter and Boba, I thought was so incredibly cool. I was like, this is awesome.
I gotta say, when they kind of revealed that with that short trailer at one of the celebrations, I couldn't believe I didn't see it coming, to be honest, because it now seems so obvious, but it's also like super smart and quite cool. And I think Dave even points out specifically what you were just saying, how Boba has this this Western style that Jango didn't. So it just seemed like a natural progression. And it made me realize, Cad Bane was created for this purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder if that is the case. Yeah, and I've always loved Cad Bane as a character. I've always thought he was such a cool bounty hunter, very different. Very
Someone
unique.
told me that you do a really good Cad Bane impression.
No, I don't.
I'm pretty sure I heard that somewhere.
Well, hello there.
There it is. You have to have Cad Bane on here for an interview at some point. You have Dave Filoni talking to Cad Bane.
Yeah, he'll
how
be
it all
around.
came about.
Well, we got to meet up with Cad Bane in the Cantina at some point.
Oh, there we go.
But yeah, I mean, he's an interesting character, and I love how he rubs off on Boba. But near the end of the arc, and I mean, anyone listening can actually look this up on YouTube. Just look up Cad Bane versus Boba Fett.
Possible spoilers. Coming up here.
Lots of possible spoilers here. So look up Cad Bane versus Boba Fett, and you'll get this proxy animation clip from the Clone Wars canceled episode. It's like, what'd you say, like a minute long? And
it's pretty short. Yeah, it's just like one scene.
Right. And somehow or another, these two friends, mentor, student, whatever, ended up in this face-off, this Western-style gunslinging moment, where
kind of like what we got today with Hunter and Cad Bane.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a village or something, or there's something going on in which Boba feels as if he's trying to stand up for this person or these people or whatever. He says, Bane, you're not going to hurt anyone else or whatever. And Cad Bane is really put in this place of being the villain in that moment. And what happens is they have this shootout, and it's a really intense buildup and everything. It was awesome. And Boba gets shot in the head, in the helmet, which leaves the very iconic dent in his forehead. And Cad Bane goes down, and we never really found out whether or not he dies or not, but we assume that he just died, right? So the whole thing that comes down to this story arc, what I was pitching earlier on when we were chatting about, alluding to this story arc, is that this arc took place during the Clone Wars. So we could be looking at another Clone Wars arc that might be resurrected, but then altered in some degree. And by alter, I mean the entire thing has now been shifted forward in the timeline.
That's what I was going to ask you, is because I wasn't quite sure where that fell in the Clone Wars timeline, because as you pointed out in previous episodes of the show here, the Clone Wars went past Order 66 and past kind of the purge and everything. So technically that arc within, say, season 8 could have been at the same time period.
Right. Yeah. And so it's unclear as to, how they would have juggled those remaining 20 something odd episodes, whether or not they would have overlapped Revenge of the Sith and then kept going with other stuff. As far as I know, the finale of season 7 is the finale that we would have seen in season 8. But, Clone Wars with its weird viewing order, they could have just done things before that and then said, hey, this actually takes place after. So I'm not ruling that out, but I would not be surprised if they took this story arc, somehow connected it to the Bad Batch, because this is Cad Bane we're talking about, like character that at Celebration of all things, they clearly said to millions of Star Wars fans across the world who had watched that clip that this character is dead, and that's how Boba got the dent, right? So if Boba Fett pops up and he doesn't have the dent,
right,
we're very likely to see this arc resurrected somehow, some way, some form.
Yeah.
If he does have, if he does have the dent, it means that this arc has happened and that Cad Bane somehow survived. Here's the other thing. So
fans, keep an eye out for Return of Boba Fett and tweet at Star Wars Escape Podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Is a dent? Is not a dent. Who is Tony Dent?
Here's the other thing. The Cad Bane asset that they used in this arc, in this Bad Batch episode, is the same new remodeled asset that they would have had for this Clone Wars arc with Boba Fett. So like he's got new armor on and stuff like that, Cad Bane.
Yeah, I noticed that he didn't have his coat, which really bothered me.
Yeah, we haven't seen him in this apparel yet, and this asset was the new asset that they would have used for Cad Bane when he reappears in Clone Wars Season 7. But that arc having not happened, they probably made this asset and then never used it, right? because they did have a proxy for it. So I imagine that they had a high res version as well.
What you're saying is this the same costume he wears when he was dueling Boba Fett?
Yes, yeah, it's the exact same costume. If you watch the proxy animation, it's the exact same thing. So that's why I'm kind of thinking to myself, could we see this arc resurrected?
I think so. To me, why would you bring back Cad Bane and not do that scene?
Yeah, right.
You could also have interactions between Boba and the Bad Batch, which is also an interesting idea.
Yeah. Here's the unfortunate other scenario, okay? Because I know a lot of people like myself love that proxy animation clip, that 30 seconds of gold right there. We could be looking at a complete rewrite of that story. We could be looking at, oh, they just used the same asset. Hey, the general public doesn't know that Cad Bane died, hasn't seen this proxy animation clip. Technically, it's not been released as something that you can consume in any canon book or story or whatever. It's just something that they showed saying, hey, this is where we would have gone. It's possible that we could be looking at a complete cancellation of that canonicity there.
So uncanonization.
Yeah, kind of, right? Like it's very similar to the dialogue in the Ahsoka book that got changed. Very similar to the details of Kanan's origins as Caleb Doom.
A lot bigger of a change, though.
It is a lot bigger of a change. There's an entire story arc being canceled, right?
And to me, why would you change something so cool?
Right? Yeah, exactly. And that's why it's hard for me to comprehend. But we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room that could be what we're looking at here. It because it did appear as like a homage, like the entire sequence of shots that we saw with the gunslinging moment between him and Hunter was very reminiscent of what would have happened between him and Boba over a hostage situation, right?
Which I feel like means they're more likely to do it, because what they just did was they showed that Cad Bane is an amazing shot and you don't want to duel him because Hunter's a very competent soldier.
Yeah, he is.
No problem. He let Hunter have a little bit of an early shot. He was closer. So he got a head start.
And Hunter's got the enhanced reflexes. He's got the enhanced senses going on, right?
And Cad Bane still is able to draw and shoot him faster.
Yeah, exactly.
So they just established Cad Bane as a very competent duelist.
Yeah.
Which makes me think then the duel between him and Boba Fett will make more sense. Because they've introduced Cad Bane in this series to new viewers to be competent duelists. So they're kind of setting it up.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. And as Clone Wars viewers goes, like we already knew he was quite the competent bounty hunter. I mean, the guy broke into the Jedi Temple of all places, right? So, and kidnapped the Chancellor.
He also managed to get a hut escaped out of a prison, which is no easy feat either.
Right, that too. And then later assassinated that hut. And also fought very briefly with Quinlan Voss's lightsaber against Obi-Wan Kenobi and held his own ground and got away. So he's a very competent bounty hunter. Yeah, it's those jet boots, man. He's a very competent guy, right? And so, yeah, I mean, very clearly, again, I mean, that's a very good thing to point out there is like, I think it's possible if they are resurrecting this arc, like they're building us up to that moment where it's like, okay, we know that he can sling a gun and win against a guy with enhanced abilities.
Yeah, and I suspect they're going to do that same shot, the gunslinging moment duelist, a few more times. To really hammer in, this guy's really good. And that'll make us then see when we see the final shot between him and Boba, like, oh, Boba's good too. Yeah,
exactly. So the question is like, if this happens, like when is it going to show up? What is the context going to be? Personally, I think instead of a village, if this arc is rewritten to any degree to keep kind of the substance material of Boba versus Cad Bane, I think it's going to be over Omega, right? I think it's possible.
Turnaround.
It's a really fast turnaround, but here's the thing: is like, could the next episode just jump right out of the Bad Batch story, kind of like what I was saying earlier, and just get into some other characters, where we then build from there with maybe Boba and whoever else to whatever conclusion that brings him and Cad Bane face to face once again.
I hope so. Honestly, I would hate for it to be this episode we see Cad Bane. Next episode, we find out Boba Fett is Cad Bane's apprentice, and it's already been happening for some time, and we just didn't know about it. We missed out on all that growth of Boba, and by the end of the next episode, they have the duel. That would make me so sad. So we miss out
yeah.
on all of that training that Boba Fett got to become the character that we know him as.
Right. And Boba, he does have a heart for the clones in a way, because we have seen him in a hostage crisis where him and Aura Singh and Bosk were they'd taken clone hostages, and Boba had a really hard time killing them, right? Like, he just couldn't do it because they all bear his own and his father's face. And that would be astronomically hard to do, to shoot someone in the face that has like your dad's face or something like that, right? Like, just no one would be able to do it unless, I don't know, no judgments, but I'm just saying general people would not be able to do it, right? And like, it's kind of a crazy situation in which Omega is a clone. She's different, but she's a clone. And like, how is there a chance that maybe she is like connected to Boba in a way that he feels so much sympathy, that she is that kind of gravity to bring him out as this honorable guy that we, you know, he is a contract bounty hunter, but I mean, there is a sense of honor to Boba as well. And we've seen that in The Mandalorian too, right? Like, we've seen him with The Mandalorian. I mean, you know, he gets his armor back and he is just bound by duty to help recover the child. And, you know, it's a different side of Boba Fett that a lot of people hadn't seen, who hadn't watched the Clone Wars before.
Right.
Because to them, all that they had known is Boba's the guy that captured Han Solo and nearly killed the guy, right? And then
like a puck.
Yeah, and then shot out at Luke Skywalker and then fell down a pit, right? So I mean, like, to a lot of people, Boba is a villain, but you know, to other fans who has seen him in a little more content, you know, comics, books, the Clone Wars for a staple point, we know him to be an honorable bounty hunter that, you know, he's got his edgy moments, but he's not a Cad Bane character who's clearly a villain.
He's so changed from what he was in the books, where he was just ruthless.
Yeah. In the expanded universe in Star Wars Legends, that was the perception of people writing Star Wars books as fans, right? Who they saw those movies and seen
the original trilogy.
Yeah.
Funny though how the ruthlessness of Boba EU is the ruthlessness of Cad Bane.
Yeah, it is. And it's not to say that Boba doesn't have that ruthlessness, because we've seen it in when he's tearing apart those stormtroopers, but I mean, he has it with a certain, you know, he does it to certain people. He's not that way with everyone, right? Like, he's a vicious man with a sense of honor.
Yeah.
And
very
that's
samurai.
And that's what I like a lot about Boba Fett, and what I've always liked about, I always thought Jango was so cool, because he was in a way this villain, but he also kind of wasn't, because he had this thing about just telling the truth to his enemy and to be honorable and respectful and this and that, and he was bound by contract, bound by his duty. And at the end of the day, he's a simple man trying to make his way in the universe. He's going to do anything for his son, right? Like Boba Fett, he's doing whatever he can to like, that was just part of his contract. He didn't care about the money. He probably does, but he demanded that he gets a clone for himself that was unaltered, because he's at heart, he's a family guy. So there's something about the Fetts that has always just been so interesting to me. As far as a character who kills people for a living.
It's funny how we've learned that that's not exclusive to the Fetts, but that's kind of within Mandalorian culture itself.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, bound by
a brotherhood.
Bound by honor and whatever the saying goes. But yeah, it's an interesting thing to speculate on, and I really hope that we get Boba showing up in the show again and a resurrection of that arc, because
I think so. I think they wouldn't bring back Cad Bane, so I put my stamp on it, the Blake stamp of future, that it's gonna happen. Yeah,
there you go. You got the Blake stamp. I wanted to just take a quick detour back to something I brought up in past weeks. Is that whether or not these canceled / unproduced Clone Wars arcs whether or not they'll come back in the form of these animated Clone Wars movies. You know, hour-long, 3 episodes stitched together in the form of an animated film. Like, I don't really know what's stopping them from doing that. Because, I mean, we've seen some pretty useless stuff dropped on Disney Plus lately. I mean, we had the Star Wars Biomes.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I love
Star
Biomes.
Wars Fly-Through.
I've watched Biomes like 3 or 4 times over now.
It's hard to tear those eyes away from the endless plains of Hoth for 45 seconds at a time.
I just love watching the Tatooine one and pointing out all the Jawas.
Oh man, that sand is just so interesting. You know? 3.5 minutes of nothing. It's like you know, and we're gonna get around to doing those commentaries or something to spice it up. But you know, it's just it's something that they've just, there was no hype about it. They just dropped them online, you know, on these Disney Plus. It's like, where did those come from? Like, I did not know they would think. I only found out about them like days before.
Thing. I think it's some cool thing that some group of people just did in their spare time, honestly.
Maybe. I mean, it looked like it had some kind of budget, but who knows? I mean,
sort of test.
If they're okay dropping a season of 1 or 2 episodes on Disney Plus as fly-throughs goes, and they don't seem to be announcing or coming out with any more. They've got enough on their plate with all the future shows and stuff that they plan to do. So I don't think we're going to see that come back, but it was such a random thing. And honestly, like, it gives me hope that we can get something like these Clone Wars movies that just, I mean, Clone Wars premiered with a movie. I mean, it's not out of the question to have more of them that just take place in different spots within the show, right?
And I hope that we get the secret release story arc of Emperor Palpatine's secret love affair. Which now we know is canon.
Anyone who doesn't know this, George had a rough plan for a live-action Star Wars show way back when he was making Revenge of the Sith. And there were, I don't know, I forget the exact number, but you know, take it with a grain of salt. It was over 40 scripts, over 40. And it was about the underworld of Star Wars. There was actually some footage online that was leaked by or posted up by Stargate, which is the studio that makes Stargate, but it was the studio that makes Stargate that was going to do this live action show. So it was like a test footage just to see, like, you know, a rough kind of like, what can we do with this amount of money for this length of a sequence? So visual effects, the whole works, right? In a small kind of tiny studio with like hardly anything there, right? And it, you know, they pulled it off reasonably well. It actually looked pretty cool. I think they had.
You're wondering, Stargate is the studio that does a lot of Doctor Who, and they also do The Walking Dead.
Yeah, The Walking Dead, yeah.
To give you an idea of like kind of the idea of quality of content. But this would be
and Stargate.
Yeah,
Stargate, the show.
Like 2006 Doctor Who. So it's pretty early in the remake series to get an idea of the quality of the CG at the time.
Right. And now that we have technology like the what is it, what they're calling it? The dome, is it? Or something? The volume, the ILM volume space, like the screen that wraps around the whole building. You know, they have a much cheaper way of producing these shows without needing to constantly remove green screens and stuff like that, right? Like it's they still got to do it all in visual effects, but it's like effectively it's better on the visual quality of the show. They're able to get really nice lighting and everything, like things that they would have struggled with before. And I don't know if you guys watched Once Upon a Time.
Way better finished product because
for sure. Like I don't know if you've ever seen Once Upon a Time, that ABC Disney show about the Disney princesses and stuff like that. Anyway, whenever they're in the fantasy land, everyone has this like washed over gray look to them because they shot the entire thing in a green room, just the whole thing. Nothing practical about anything. It was just the actors and actresses in this CG environment, and they pulled it off to a degree, but it's not believable when you look at it. You're like, oh, that clearly is, that's clearly a fantasy land.
For television, you either have to spend a whole bunch of money and make sets and then add CG into it, or you cheap out and you do just a green screen and make it all CG, but nothing looks right.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Especially lighting on actors, it never matches.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something that a lot of those early, because I mean, we all got to keep this in mind that this rough script was like 2005 kind of thing. Like this was a time where green screen was in some scenarios being a little overused, and it was a developing technology still as far as CG backgrounds goes. Very high budget films pulled it off. I mean, Pirates of the Caribbean absolutely nailed it.
So did Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings was great. I mean, the prequels really pushed a lot of boundaries as far as that work goes as well.
Maybe a little too far at times. You could tell, especially Attack of the Clones.
Yeah,
they were.
That was the first digital movie ever.
So, ran out of time in a couple shots, though. There's one specifically when they're in the arena. You see Count Dooku, and there's a lot of green screen visible in the background.
Oh, yeah. You can tell behind his hairs, it's like fuzzy. Yeah. But I mean,
most of it was great.
Most of it was awesome, right? And I mean, props to them back in like, they were working on this movie in like 2001.
Yeah,
and working on like Windows XP and like
every shot is CG in it.
Oh man, it's unbelievable what they accomplished, and we're only watching movies like Infinity War and Endgame and various other massive visual effects spectacles today because of those movies, right?
Exactly, yeah, because they learned and made the tools from the process of making those films.
Right. Yeah. And with Clones being fully shot, the first movie ever fully shot on digital, that's how most films are done nowadays. I don't think there's any movie that uses actual film unless they're shooting like one scene on an IMAX camera or something like that. Like it's very rare that directors choose to use actual film these days. It's mostly all shot on digital.
It's usually too expensive. So the last one I know, I bet you it was in Rise of Skywalker. The last time I remember being advertised was Force Awakens during the chase scene where Rey first drives the Millennium Falcon. That was
the Falcon scene. Yeah, that was because that was an IMAX shot. Yeah. It was an IMAX shot, right?
This is a massive tangent, but I guess what we're going to say is one of the story arcs is about Emperor Palpatine's secret love affair.
Right, yeah, and that would have taken place in this show. Man, we have a way of making things interesting and drawn out, and hopefully you guys enjoying listening to us because...
Boy, can we ramble.
Yeah, we can. I mean, this is why it's, one Bad Batch episode can turn into an hour-long conversation.
Yeah, show by fans, for fans. That's for sure.
Exactly. That's the motto. But anyway, I mean, going back to Bad Batch, is there anything else you want to bring up before we wrap up here?
I just wanted to point out that it was super cool, that final shot, or one of the final shots when Hunter wakes up after being knocked out by Cad Bane, and they just like pulled his visor design like straight out of Republic Commando. Yeah,
they pulled that from they did a scene like that in the episode that we meet Gregor in the Clone Wars, the Republic Commando named Gregor. Yeah. And they had the exact same shot, except it was slightly tweaked to look even more like the game because the clones all have thinner visors and the Republic Commandos have thicker ones, right? And they have like the shield thing on the bottom and all that stuff and whatever else. So
that means the Republic Commandos have shields in canon.
I think, I forget if I'm pretty sure I had the shield there, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they've got something, but even if not, like it was just so cool to see the same UI of the same GUI interface of the visor, and it looks like they've tweaked that a little bit for the clone for his clone helmet.
If you notice, his visor is a thinner slit, right? Like it's not as tall, the visor size, and that was matched in that shot.
Yeah, it was really cool. I love how they did that. I'm still kind of like, I don't really know why they have that target in the middle of the visor.
I think it's just an homage because it doesn't actually make sense.
No, it doesn't. Yeah.
It doesn't match where he's pointing his blaster. So that means it's going to be wrong 90% of the time. Yeah, exactly. But still, it was cool to see. I liked the acknowledgement there, which was nice. But I don't know if I got to say anything like last minute about this particular episode. It's just very subtle, but
I absolutely loved how they're still using all these Republic ships just repainted, and I don't know, I'm buying the fact that they're Empire ships now. I mean, like, we've seen these V-Wings fly by the camera on occasion, just as they did in the finale scene of Revenge of the Sith, when Vader and Palpatine are looking out at the construction of the Death Star. And the V-Wings had the same engine / sound effect as the TIE fighters do.
The ion engines.
And it was also just a very nice subtle touch that they threw those in this episode when we looked at Camino, which is effectively now an Imperial facility that breeds troopers, right? I liked that a lot, and I thought that was a great touch. They've been doing such a great job with this show, and you know, I just hope that they're able to keep it up, and then also effectively put in these lost Clone Wars stories arcs somehow, some way, the ones that we want. And,
this is Dave Filoni's like big time, right? This is a shot.
This is his big, Dave's big adventure. He's like, he's got the creative control of most of these shows happening right now on Disney Plus and stuff.
Dude, he's got to release a biography. I got to know all the ins and outs, how this all went down. I'm so curious.
Oh yeah, I would love to know. Somebody's got to sit down with Dave and do like a 3-day interview of the guy, because there is so much for him to talk about. You know, like when he gets talking about anything, you can listen to him for like 30 minutes straight, and like, you know, it's just all great stuff.
But he's also just good at making a story. I mean, from when he was working on Avatar: Last Airbender, and he got the opportunity, you got the interview, right? Even that's a great story.
Yeah. He tells that story really well too. But he's an interesting guy, and you know, honestly, the story of what I like so much about when he tells that story on these interviews and stuff is that he is such a big Star Wars fan, and it's important, I think, for Star Wars to be driven by people who love Star Wars, right? And people who understand Star Wars and understand the original 6-part vision of George Lucas that ended with Return of the Jedi or Revenge of the Sith, or however you like to look at the cycle, right? And you know, I think like it's been nice to have an expanse of Star Wars content, of course, but it's been a hit or miss for a lot of people with some of these things, and I honestly think Dave is just the guy to make good Star Wars content that really reflects George Lucas's works, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this without making George sound bad, because I love George and everything he's done. But I think Dave is like, he's able to get across the stories that George wanted to tell, but tell it in a way that connects with people a little better than George was able to do.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, George himself has admitted he's not an actor's director. He's a storyteller, right? So when the actors and when it comes to dialogue and writing dialogue, that, you know, it's overly impressive that one guy can write, direct, and produce a movie like Revenge of the Sith, a massive, just a massive epic movie that has so much to it, right? And I mean, it's clearly the busiest, biggest visual effects filled movie of the whole saga, and you know, and it's unbelievable what he's been able to do. But when it comes down to some of these things with, you know, some of these lines, right? You know, you've had people like Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford go on record saying, like, George, you can write this, but like, you sure can't say it. And it's like, it's a bit of a laughing joke at this point in time, just because everyone loves those movies anyways.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like, Dave comes from the perspective of a fan, but he's been trained by the master, and he knows what fans want, and he knows what he wants. And so there's no wishy-washy with Dave, right? Like, he gets it.
Dave's Luke.
Yeah.
And George is Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan couldn't quite finish the job, but then Luke came around.
Right. Well, let's hope Luke doesn't have a moment where he goes to an island to die in wealth and pity. So
don't worry, they'll uncanonize that.
World between worlds. Let's do it.
For the record, that's a stretch. I think they're gonna smooth it over though, so it goes down easier.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
share on the Twitter feed if you haven't already that cool video that Bryce shared. That race scene, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'll send that out. If anyone hasn't seen the fan re-edit of the Rey scene where she kills Palpatine in Rise of Skywalker, if you haven't seen the movie yet, spoilers. But someone re-edited that scene to have all the Force ghosts of, all the Jedi past standing behind her, and this was something I think a lot of people would have wanted to see. And even myself, when I walked out of the movie, I was thinking to myself, how come we just heard all those voices and didn't see anybody? Like, that was just odd to me, I
agree.
That would have been the perfect, like, did it come down to budget or time or what? Because clearly it would have been an amazing thing to see at the very end of that final chapter, right? Or what they were effectively
it's supposed to be the end of
all the poster, all the marketing pointed this towards like the epic finale of everything, right? And a lot of us were shaking our heads going like, sure, okay. but I mean, like, at least try and embrace that, right? Like, I mean, like, let's see some returning characters, some faces from movies past or something like that, because I don't know, man. It's a rabbit hole of a conversation and complaints, but
such an easy fix to do it.
It is an easy fix, and it clearly some fan was able to do it and post on YouTube.
Those Force ghosts look great.
Yeah, and they used footage from their moments in other films, and it turned out awesome. Honestly, like for someone who only has 6 movies to work with for those other characters, and they picked all the right spots and put it in just right in a way that didn't look weird, and it got the point across, and I think it did a lot of justice for anyone who wanted to see that. So go and look it up, and I'll be posting it on the Twitter for sure. So, all right, any last things before we kick it off here?
I think we pretty well covered it.
Sweet.
And don't forget to tweet out if you see Boba. Yes, dent, no dent, Tony dent.
I say that again. Hashtag what?
Hashtag yes dent, no dent, Tony dent.
Yes dent, no dent, Tony dent?
Yeah, because dent on the helmet of Boba, because then we know the timeline. And Tony dent because Tony dent.
What? Tony Dent? Where's Tony coming? Who's this Tony guy?
I think he's from Batman.
Oh yeah. You mean Harvey Dent?
Yeah, him.
Yes, Dent, no Dent, Harvey Dent. Tony Dent.
Just edit Harvey over all that.
Oh my goodness.
Tony, Harvey, whatever.
Yes Dent, hashtag yes Dent, no Dent, Harvey Dent.
Harvey Dent. That's right.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Just for the heck of it, just so that we can actually like look it up and know clearly there's going to be no results. There's going to be no results under that search hashtag. So
it's true.
If anyone does tweet that out, please do. Yes Dent, no Dent, Harvey Dent, and then tag us at SW Escape Podcast. All right, thanks guys for tuning in, and as always, please give us your 5 stars and reviews. They're always welcome to come in. If you're on the iPhone platform, just go to your Apple Podcast and leave a nice review if you can, if you got the time. And most importantly is send a link to this show to a friend, to a Star Wars fan who likes Star Wars, just so that the show is on their radar. And we really appreciate it because it just hits a larger demographic of people. And nonprofit show, we just like to see that people are tuning in and listening to us banter on about Star Wars. So more recently, of course, with the Bad Batch out in the open and halfway through the first season now, we hope that you guys have been enjoying the show as much as we have, and we would love to know your thoughts so far on the Bad Batch. So you're welcome to send in a voicemail to our SpeakPipe address, which is listed in the description of this podcast episode. You can follow us on Twitter for the daily updates and announcements that we don't tend to hit as much on the podcast, but things that might just be interesting in general in the Star Wars world. Follow us at SW Escape Podcast, as well as our Instagram account. Our email is swescapepodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to send in any listener feedback, mail, whatever you got. It's doors open, and or inbox is open, I should say. And once again, sorry this episode is late. We just had a crazy week, but we're looking forward to doing the next one on the weekend. We'll see you guys in the next one, and may the Force be with you.